My interaction with Dave has been like a whirlwind. We had this first introductory call about 6 months ago, and then since then I've spent a lot of time thinking about Evergreen, and in particular how the Evergreen concepts relate to highly successful multi-generational family businesses. And I'm really sort of focused on the 4th, 5th, 6th, and even 7th generation businesses that clearly have something special going on in them. And it's just noteworthy that your 7 Ps line up perfectly with these family businesses. The thing that doesn't line up, and I would love Grant's presentation, is this, you don't get the selection of DNA in a family business that you get when you're at Touche or DoubleClick and the like. You're sort of, you have the family there. So what I did for this presentation, two thoughts. First, Inadvertent is very intentional. Spoiler alert, I don't think you can plan to be a multi-generational family business. I think you become one because the circumstances lead you there and you're enabled. But planning it is a little challenging. The second point I'd make is, if you'll notice, I changed the topic of my talk to secrets of longevity rather than secrets of success. I thought success was a little personal, and so I'm really talking about companies that have lasted a long time. And I forgot to even look at this. So it's longevity that I'm talking about. So the topics I'm going to hit briefly are 4 what I would call challenges that family businesses have to getting this longevity. The growth, which is a thing we've talked about in almost every speaker. Something that's unusual for family business is this concept of hygiene versus strategic, which we'll get into. And then what I find fascinating about family businesses is they have these life cycle challenges that are highly predictable, and in terms of the overcoming them, they clearly are preventable if you put in the work beforehand. And then finally, this concept of strategic ownership, which is really the successful multi-generational family businesses are really well aligned in their business. And finally, I'll show you what success looks like or what longevity looks like at the end. So my target audience. So I like to say that families do not have a monopoly, or family businesses don't have a monopoly on dysfunctionality. We've heard all kinds of wonderful presentations about companies here. I'm sure there's a little dysfunctionality going on there as well. Family businesses get a rap for this, and much of it is deserved, I would say. But the ones that have lasted a long period of time have figured out how to overcome it. The other thing that was interesting about working with Dave on Tugboat as it related to multi-generational families and this Evergreen concept is there's a major parallel with employee-owned companies, whether they're ESOP companies or family businesses that have turned into employee companies, and there are quite a few of them in the United States. And I think some of the things we're going to talk about here relate to that as well. So this is Goldilocks. Growth is challenging for any company. Too little growth is terrible because you can't go forward, and too much growth, especially in a family business, yields complexity, usually requires leverage, and that has its risks as well. What I find with family-owned businesses have just lasted, and I'm thinking of one's 170, and I'm thinking of the United States. It's remarkable that they've had growth, but it's definitely not in a straight line. They've had amazing bumps, and in some cases bankruptcy. The company I'll just mention in a second actually failed in 1873 in the panic, and the family had to buy it back from what was the equivalent of a bankruptcy court. But that company, German immigrants coming to the United States in the 1830s, just before John Stupp's company was formed, to sell candles of all things. Then it got into the soap business and actually invented floating soap, which they thought was a terrible idea, and they sold it to Procter & Gamble, who made something out of it. And then they went on to deal with animal tallow that they were using in the soap, but they realized it'd be a good lubricant for wagon wheels, for the wagon trains that were moving west. And that turned into basically a specialty materials company that today is a very thriving lubricants company with a sales force of 250 salesmen around the United States selling to the semiconductor industry and the fracking industry, among others. So they're an example of it's not a straight line. All these companies have had failures in their time or near failures, but they've reinvented themselves and figured out how to go forward. Now, this is what I call the obligatory family tree. Every speaker that I have in my class, and I was telling Dave about this, for each class, I have 2 family businesses come in and present. The range is, I've come to have some first generation, second generation self-declared family businesses, but the highlight of the course are the ones that are 5th, 6th, and 7th, and we've had there are a bunch of them in St. Louis and around the Midwest. But I asked them to come in with a family tree of the founder all the way down so we can see where they came from. And this is the first big lie that successful family business tell, and it comes in the family tree because often the family tree doesn't have all the family in it. So what is this all about? Well, what it's all about is that it's very hard to manage the growth of the family and the growth of the business. That's the fundamental problem of family businesses. And the second problem is, of course, the DNA. Unlike Grant's talk, you don't really choose DNA in a family business. You have it, and then you have this other peculiar circumstance, and then when people get married, those are the circles, you get a fusion of other DNA that you didn't choose. And so it's just highly problematical. I would say this is the fundamental problem for any family business, how to manage this. It's becoming more of a problem now with demographics, people living longer. So today you can have 3 generations in the business. That's not unusual. And you usually go through 2.5 leadership succession efforts during the course of somebody's lifetime. So very different today. Another thing to mention is this is while this is important for family business, this is also important for wealth, because wealth is outrun by the growth of a family as well. So the rags to riches phenomena in 3 generations, usually takes a little longer, is largely a function of this chart. I use this in my class as a benchmarking tool to compare decisions that families make in good faith versus how a business school professor or a private equity person would make the same decision. And the whole concept is how does the decision that you're about to make in the family business affect the long-term value of the company? And I think this benchmarking technique is unbelievably useful when you have the unusual aspect of the family involvement. So family involvement has 2 sort of, beside the numbers, has 2 aspects to it that cause you problems in managing the company. The first is the purpose of the company is never really crystal clear oftentimes. Certainly to outsiders it seldom is. And families have their own reasons for being in business. When I ask in class, why are you in business and what's this really all about in terms of the purpose of your company, if you stated, it's a range of things, not unlike Evergreen, but there's maybe more to it because the family's involved. In a lot of families, it's the pride of having the family go on for multiple generations. I don't know if that was the case in the beginning, but it's certainly the case now. The second issue in a family business is you don't know, it's not control as much as you don't know who has the power. So when you go back to the family tree and you see how stock would move through generations, you know where the stock is, but there are people of influence in the family that are calling the shots, and they might not even work in the company. So those are the 2 sort of tricky problems you confront. What I found with the successful multi-generational families is they've taken steps on what we call hygiene, which is more the mechanics of how you how you set up your company. And in family businesses, it's all about the estate planning and how that fits with the stock ownership and the like, versus strategic, which is purpose, vision, mission, stewardship, which are clearly the most important things. And it's not unlike talent and character that we heard about earlier. You've got to get the hygiene right or you don't stand a chance. And if you have the hygiene right, you better get the strategy right or you're going to fail too. So for a family business that lasts a long time, they've got both things right. So the takeaways on this hygiene front are, first of all, there's always somebody in control, total control, that can make decisions. Second of all, the stock is always controlled, whether through a voting trust or a shareholder agreement. You can't go multi-generational without having that. Third of all, the stock is in a generation skipping trust vehicle, so estate taxes are never an issue. Now in family businesses, stock passes through inheritance, not through sale generally. And that's another feature that in a family business, you're passing stock with people not paying for it. They're just inheriting it. And that creates problems of its own. But you sort of, to go this direction, you sort of give up on the idea of a sale of the stock if you're going to go truly multi-generational. And then the final sort of hygiene strategy that these families have, and almost uniformly, is they have an exit strategy for family members that are not part of the program. Going back to the family tree, if there are people that are miserable and they're not appropriate or they're having problems, you've got to have a vehicle to get rid of them. And these families that have survived 5, 6, 7 generations, they have that. Now what's really interesting is, as it relates to this chart, is in my class I have family businesses come in that have as a rule that no family member can work in the family business. Now, I was staggered by that. But okay, we have a family business, but they have a rule that no family member can work at it. They've really studied this chart, I can tell you that, and they're really worried about that value. And then there are other families, equally successful, that have a rule that nobody can own stock in the company unless they work for the company. A totally different perspective. So the message there is there are a lot of ways to skin the cat, but you've got to get the hygiene right, and somebody needs to focus on the strategy. So as to strategy, it comes into play with this. And these are what I call the predictable life cycle challenges. A couple of the speakers have mentioned, and I've talked to people in the audience here that are in family businesses. The big crisis period is that sibling partnership moving to cousin collaboration. And that's why going third generation and beyond is sort of, it only happens infrequently, and that's because that's so difficult. Now, and the other big issue is CEO succession, and the problem there is, going back again to the family tree, you've got to make choices, and families, especially parents, don't like to make choices among their kids, but choices are required. So 3 things that are going on with family business today that I'll just leave with you as it relates to dealing with these challenges is, sort of, my question is, how do family businesses deal with these problems? First of all, just about every one of my class out of 40 companies, they all use psychological consultants. Now, they weren't using the positive thinking ones, but that would certainly be of help. They use what Dennis does, and a whole cottage industry, what you call family business consultants, and they work over a long period of time on how to resolve differences among family members and family members and how they interact with the business. They also help immeasurably on CEO succession and compensation practices. The second aspect of family business today, the ones that have survived, they all have some kind of a board with outsiders on it. Whether it's advisory or fiduciary really depends on the situation. But they all rely on expert help from the outside. And that's critical. And related to that is, of these 5th, 6th, 7th generations, there is a pronounced use of non-family management. I don't not really say, but non-family management versus family management. So they've gone to the outside to make their business sustainable. And the final thing I'd mention is as to what I call spoils of ownership, which would be compensation, employment, dividends, and the like. They really use third-party consultants, HR professionals, or independent directors to resolve disputes in that, because the compensation is definitely the hottest area of dispute in a family business. So I thought I'd end with this sort of crazy chart. Chip was talking about, how the board of directors gets formed at his company and how it's changed over time. This is a creation of these family business consultants, and I must say this is not a legal thing at all. This is incredibly substantive and incredibly valuable. What they've done is they've created different vehicles for communication. So what I'd call this slide really is improving communication in a family business, which I think is the key to success over the long haul. Just to take you through it, so that we know what a board does. Family council would be people that own the stock, and that can be, Enterprise Rent-A-Car in St. Louis, $28 billion company, has 10 stockholders, third generation. That means kind of amazing. In my class, I had a packaging company up in Wisconsin, 210 shareholders, 3 of them in the business, none in a material way, 7th generation. So how did they communicate? Well, they had a lot of stockholders, and that's a very happy company, by the way. And the stockholders meet formally each year in what they call the family council, and this can be done in a variety of ways. There's no one way to do it. But the idea is to decide, what the stockholders really want, and they come to an agreement, and then they elect a board that can execute the plan that they come up with. Probably the most important piece is this thing, the family assembly. And I run a family office, and this has been enormously helpful both in the family business context and in advising families that have issues that are gnawing at them and are causing disputes and the like. The idea of the family assembly is the entire family. It's kids, it's spouses, it's not limited to stockholders. So in the case of the company up in Wisconsin, they had pictures of 250 people getting together in this big auditorium. It's sort of like a Buffett annual meeting or something. But the point is, they talk about, in this area, they talk about what's important to the family. And this teases out that power issue that I mentioned earlier, that you really don't know who has ultimate control until you get into that meeting. Without regard to who owns what, it's can you get consensus as to what the family wants this business to look like from the family's perspective. Those are fed in, of course, to the family council of the board of directors. What I would suggest is starting at the bottom on this whenever there's an issue in a family business, and this, I think the successful ones understand that, and I would take it one step further, that the individuals that are part of this big family need to have their own advice and need to know where they stand and need to know what the implications are of these decisions for them. Oftentimes, when you're talking about today, of course, with this longevity issue in families, you're going to have very young kids that are going to come into ownership, and if they're not coming into ownership, they're going to be part of the family that ultimately will come into ownership, and they need somebody counseling them on the importance of the business, how to understand the business, and how to place themselves in the business. So we found that starting with individuals, moving to family, then owners, and then the board is the way to go. This packaging company in Wisconsin, interestingly enough, they resolved in the family assembly that the growth of the business was the paramount thing for the health of the overall family. They didn't get this dispute that some were owners, some weren't, but they thought it was the most important thing. The family council agreed, and ultimately because of a transaction they were able to do and distribute a lot of cash, they were able to give the board direction to grow the company, take greater risk, and stop dividends for 5 years. So that's the kind of strategic decision that if you can get the right alignment, can help you grow the business in ways you never imagined. I told you at the beginning I was going to show you what longevity looked like, and if I can, there it is. So I went through Family Business Magazine. I had literally dozens of pictures to pick. This is sort of like the family tree in my class that I force people to bring. They always bring this picture of some sort. And I think this picture speaks 1,000 words, that a successful multi-generational family is a force. It's got family harmony, it's got community involvement, it's got family connections in the community, and it's just a wonderful thing. So the downer here is you can't plan for this, but maybe with some of the insights I've shared with you, you can seize the opportunity and become something like this someday. So thank you.